Hi there, we're going to get started in just 1 second. Okay, we'll give it just 1 more minute until we get some people to sign on. And then we're going to start for today our class. Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break with the Rabbi. Today is Erev Shabbos, right before Shabbos. This week is a double Torah reading as we're going to be reading from Chukas and Balak, as well as it is a special day on the Chabad calendar, tomorrow and Sunday, which is the days of Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz. Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz are the 12th and the 13th of Tammuz. These were the days that the previous Rebbe was released and saved from the communists, from a death sentence which they placed upon him. On the 3rd of Tammuz, he was commuted, and he was then sentenced to 10 days in exile. However, on the 12th and 13th day of Tammuz, he was then released and ultimately released from Russia, and that thereby saved his life before World War II, ending up in Latvia, then to Warsaw, and eventually to the shores of America. And when we look at the Torah reading of Chukas and Balak, it's a double Torah reading this week. And the Torah reading begins with telling us about the laws of the red heifer. And as we know, in the laws of the Torah, there are 3 types of laws. We've mentioned many times before. The laws that are statutes, which there are no rationale to, as the name of this week's Torah reading is called a chukah. Then there are the laws called mishpatim, laws with rationale, that even if the Torah, God forbid, wouldn't have been given, we would also have to keep these laws. And then there are laws which are edus, testimony, like the laws of Shabbos and the laws of Passover, which those are to remember things that and events that happened throughout Jewish history or throughout the creation of the world. But then we come, as we look into the Torah reading, and we read about what does it mean, chukah, what does it mean, these laws? So what is the laws of the red heifer? What's the law that's considered a statute? Are laws pertaining purity and impurity. There is no logical reason that we can explain what should be determined pure or impure. It is based explicitly and only on the belief of God, that God tells us that this is considered pure and this is considered impure. However, as we move on from this week's Torah reading, and we continue to see during the Torah reading where Moses is faced with the greatest giant of their time, Sichon and Og, who are superpowers, not only superpowers, but they seemed immortal. They were giants, literally giants. Moses panicked, and what does God tell him? Don't you worry, I've given him in your hands. Something which is seemingly unbelievable. How can Moses, how can the Jewish people take on the superpowers of the time? Not only that, the Torah explains and says how all the nations gathered together to gang up against the Jews. What happened? How did that work? What did God tell him? Al tira oisai, don't be afraid of him, because I've given him in your hands. And ultimately Moses is victorious over them and takes their property and gives it to the Jewish people. Then we move on to the next Torah reading, which is Balak. Balak hires a prophet, Bilham, a non-Jewish prophet who was able to time the right time when the Jewish people, so to speak, were misbehaving, so God can let his vengeance on them. And he tried to curse the Jewish people, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but many times tried. And every time he tried, not only did not curses come out, but only the greatest of blessings, that those blessings are incorporated in our prayers. Ma toivu elecha Yaakov, how wonderful are the tents of the Jewish people. And then he continues to prophesy about the time of Darach Koich of Yaakov, how a star will shoot forth from David, and a staff will arise amongst the Jews, prophesizing the time of David and prophesizing the coming of Mashiach. So the greatest prophecies we find in the Torah reading, where It was meant to be about cursing the Jewish people. Only the best blessings came to them. But then we come to the sad part, the end of the Torah reading, where Bilam realizes that the only way that he can conquer the Jewish people is not by an outside influence, but by their own vulnerability. By making them vulnerable, which is by causing them to rebel against God, then they become vulnerable in everybody else's eyes. So what he did was send the Moabite princess to seduce the Jewish people into doing idolatry and promiscuity, causing them to be vulnerable and to be attacked. That is when Pinchas, as we're going to read about next week, stands up and stops what's going on. But what do we see? What's the entire theme? We know this is not just the story of the past. This has a practical application to our time and something very important, especially to the times that we're living in currently. And of course, we see this from the previous Rebbe that will be celebrating his special day tomorrow and Sunday. What is the Torah telling us? Chukah, a statue. The word chok in Hebrew doesn't just mean a statue, but also means to be engraved. What's the difference between something that is written and something that's engraved? Something that is written, it's ink upon paper, two separate ideas. Something that's engraved, it becomes part and parcel of the item. When I have an idea, when I have something that I'd like to share, if it's based on my intelligence, it could be challenged. I can negate it. I can agree with it. It's not part of me. Yes, I like it. It's my writing. I'm very influenced by it, but it's not necessarily one with me the moment that it's only based on my intelligence. But if it's something that's based on faith, it's something that cannot be rocked or shaken. It's something that becomes part of me, like engraved. It's inside, written within me. It becomes permeated within the individual. It can never be removed because it's a chukah. It's something which, that's the word chok, to be engraved. A statute, a mitzvah that we follow, not because I understand it, not because it makes sense, but because God gave it to me, it's never going to change. It will be there forever with me. Therefore, as we continue into the Torah reading, why was Moses able to overcome those great giants? Because his belief in God was not based on his strength, was not because he had a great army, was not because he had great wealth of the Jewish people, was because God told him and he will be victorious over these great giants. It was part of him, it changed his being, and he was able to overcome it. The same thing is also when the Jewish people came and stood up against the non-Jewish prophet who tried to curse them. It wasn't because the Jewish people did something that made them great. It was their absolute faith in God and their connectivity to God, which therefore protected them throughout the times. It wasn't something which was rationale. It was beyond rationale. It was super rationale. It was an absolute faith, an absolute protection. The moment they gave up that protection, they gave up that faith, meaning that they made themselves vulnerable to idolatry, all of a sudden that protection then lapsed, and then they were prone to being attacked. The same is true in every single aspect of our life. We have different things and way we look at things in life. Sometimes we look at items in life and say, what do we do about it? How is this challenge going to affect me? What am I going to do about the challenge that comes my way? Will I let it pass, or will I take it on? What we need to know is that if God places us in a certain time, in a certain place, we have the resiliency to stand up against it. And not only do we have the resiliency, but we will overcome it and be victorious about it. The previous Rebbe showed this to us very clearly. The previous Rebbe was faced with a terrible challenge, a time and a situation which was horrendous for Jewish people. The communists at the time wanted to destroy everything of Judaism. The communists realized that and considered and labeled the previous Rebbe as an enemy of the country. And therefore they sentenced him, God forbid, to death. They came and destroyed his home, looked to destroy the entire empire of what the previous Rebbe was building, which was, as he realized, as communism is trying to destroy Judaism, he created an underground network, which we see today. All those embers that he made came to ignition as soon as communism fell 70 years later. But at the time, they realized he was the enemy. And the previous Rebbe made a commitment from the moment he was arrested, that he was resolute, that he was not going to bend or buckle to the communists, be it what it may be. They could not change him. He was so strong in his conviction because he knew that him being strong in his conviction will keep the Jewish people strong at that time as well. Should he bend and buckle, all of a sudden Judaism will fall to the side. What will the people who are there suffering and being in the trenches, fighting the good war of keeping Judaism alive? The previous Rebbe realized that if it becomes chukah, if it becomes engraved within me, if it's part of us, nothing can take us away. Even the communist bullet will not stop him. And lo and behold, the previous Rebbe prevailed. He was successful. Even after he left Russia, he left an underground network of Hasidim who were there, who fought on the front lines, giving their life for Judaism. That 70 years later today, you go to Russia. Now it's more than 70 years later, 93 years later, you see a renaissance of Judaism, strong, an army of good Jews practicing throughout the former Soviet Union. The lesson for us is very clear that the previous Rebbe taught us, and as this week's Torah reading teaches us. We are now in unprecedented times, trying times, times where it's easy for us to give up, close the book, turn the page, and say, call me when this is over. But that's not what the previous Rebbe taught us, and that's what the Torah reading tells us, how we stand up against the challenges of our time. We have to be resolute. We have to be resilient. We have to stand up strong and say that if God gave us this challenge, means that God trusts us that we can overcome it and stand for it. And the question is, how are we going to come out stronger and prevail from this? How are we going to realize that this is part of us? Because when we realize that this challenge is a God-given challenge, and we have God within us, it's not something on the surface. It's not something we just lip service. It's who we are, what we identify with. We will come out stronger. We will be stronger. We are stronger. Think about it this way. It's very easy to see the light when the sun is shining. It's very easy to do things in the light while the sun is shining. But what happens when it gets dark? Then all of a sudden those stars need to come shining forth. God is waiting for us. In these trying times, he wants us to be those stars, as it says in this week's Torah reading. Bilam says the Jewish people are a star that shoots forth from Jacob. We are that star that comes in the dark of time, in the time when it doesn't look so easy, in a time when it doesn't look so gratifying. We can be that shining star, make somebody's day light and bright, bringing happiness, goodness, and kindness to the world, transforming a crazy world we live in today into a beautiful oasis of godliness. Let's take on that mission. Let us learn from this Torah reading that we can be the star of the time. Learn from the previous Rebbe, as tomorrow is his birthday and the day of his liberation. And on the day of his liberation, the previous Rebbe told us it's not only him that God has liberated, but every single Jewish person is liberated. We are liberated, that we are not confined. Our Judaism is not challenged. We have the ability to stand up for what is right, to do what is right, only go out of our own confines, to look beyond the challenges and make this world a godly place. Wishing you a good Shabbos, a healthy Shabbos, and let us all together celebrate these two special days with going beyond our reach, going beyond ourselves, and being that shining star in the darkest of times. God bless you and have a wonderful Shabbos, and we'll see you again on Monday, 1 p.m. lunch break with the Rabbi.